Hello everybody, my name is Pixel and welcome to the Sapphire Tech YouTube channel. Since we are now firmly in the grasp of 2020 with a new console generation just on the horizon and many awesome looking games just around the corner, I thought that I'd take shelter from all the hype and take a quick look back over some of the awesome experiences that released over the last 12 months. So today I am pleased to be able to present you with our list of the top 10 PC games of 2019. Now, I was originally hoping to get this video up much earlier, however, due to missing out on some of the incredible games that released in 2019, I've spent much of January playing catch up. If there's something that you really like from last year that you don't see in this list, please do let us know in the comment section. Due to the sheer amount of games that are releasing these days, we've also limited ourselves to the bigger budget games only. If you'd like to start seeing indie gaming content on this channel in future, please let us know in the comment section as well, along with some of your favourite games of 2019. But with that said, on with the list. Number 10. Remnant from the Ashes. The only thing more difficult than choosing which game you're going to be able to place at number 1 in a top 10 is selecting which game you're going to be able to squeeze onto the end of the list. With so many great games all released in 2019, all worthy of a spot, I decided to be a little selfish and rather than focusing on objectivity, I instead went with a game that I personally gotten the most enjoyment from. Remnant from the Ashes is a sort of Souls-like co-op third-person shooter that secures its spot on this list by having the ability to emulate much of that tension that games in the Souls-like genre thrive on. While the jump from melee-centric combat over to ranged obviously does have some big game design consequences, it still manages to keep much of that Souls-like core intact. You're still going to be spending much of your time slowly progressing between checkpoints, dodge rolling attacks while managing your stamina, and fighting a large selection of bosses. Is it perfect? No, of course not, far from it. However, it is by far the best example of a Souls-like shooter that I've certainly seen, and it does get an awful lot right, even if it does still stumble in a few key areas. So if you're up for a challenge, enjoy playing with friends, or simply fancy something a little bit different, you could do a lot worse than Remnant from the Ashes.
Oh, it's over.
Number 9. Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Each year, I make an effort to jot down a list of my favourite PC games, and Call of Duty as a franchise has always managed to just miss out on a place, even though I'd be the first to admit that I'm often able to squeeze out a fair amount of enjoyment from each instalment. Call of Duty Modern Warfare bucks this trend by being the biggest leap forward in terms of technology, gameplay, and even business model that we've seen from the franchise in well over a decade. And while I still wouldn't claim that it's doing anything particularly innovative, it does at least manage to mix things up a little at the same time as retaining much of what makes a Call of Duty game a Call of Duty game. It's also been nice to see the return of a single-player campaign after its absence from last year's entry. While the story's not quite as provocative as it would like to make out, it's surprisingly well produced and demonstrates some pretty solid pacing, making it one of the very best linear action shooters that I've played in quite some time. Multiplayer has also seen some rather interesting additions. Alongside the usual suspects, we now have access to the new 2 vs 2 gunfight and 32 vs 32 ground war game modes. Despite a rather weak launch in terms of multiplayer content, the updates have been rolling in and things are already looking much healthier. It's also great to see that rather than splitting up the player base across multiple premium DLCs, the developers are instead going to be releasing free updates and banking on selling cosmetics and battle passes to make up for that lost revenue stream. Providing that the content keeps flowing, Call of Duty Modern Warfare could very well end up offering some of the very best value in the entire series.
Captain Price.
Sergeant Garrick.
You with me?
Number 8. Apex Legends. I think it's safe to say that any game that manages to go toe-to-toe with the juggernaut that is Fortnite deserves a spot on this list, which is exactly what Apex Legends did back in February of last year. Developed by Respawn Entertainment and set in the Titanfall universe, it should come as no surprise that both the gunplay and movement ended up being some of the very best in its class. Apex Legends also dared to be different. Rather than primarily focusing on the solo player experience like most other Battle Royale games, it instead committed itself to the idea of team play. This led to some simple yet innovative ideas being implemented, such as the ability to respawn fallen team members at set points around the map, and a super useful pinging system that now looks set to become an industry standard for team-based games going forward. Unfortunately, due to a rather lackluster first season in terms of content, the player base soon started to fall off, though it is worth noting that in recent months a steady stream of content has been established. While its time at the top was relatively short-lived, its impact is undeniable, and that is why it is one of our top games of 2019. Number 7. The Outer Worlds. Calling The Outer Worlds Fallout in Space could be considered rather insulting, and yet, it's almost entirely accurate. Developed by Obsidian Entertainment, The Outer Worlds is the first game that I can think of that not only manages to properly emulate Bethesda's RPG formula, but also exceed it in many ways. This shouldn't come as much of a surprise when you realise that Obsidian are the ones responsible for games such as Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, and even Fallout New Vegas, a game where the developers lost their bonuses due to missing out on a targeted Metacritic rating by a single point, even though many of the game's technical issues could likely have been placed at Bethesda's feet. The reason I bring this up is because The Outer Worlds is running on the Unreal Engine 4, and on a technical level, there is very little to complain about. I mean, sure, the graphics look a little dated and the performance could certainly be a little better, but when it comes to problems such as bugs and glitches, the game is surprisingly well polished. While the combat still lags behind most modern first-person shooters, it's still miles ahead of anything that we've seen from Fallout, as is the level of freedom that you're given when it comes to tackling objectives. Meaning you're pretty much able to kill everybody that you come into contact with and still reach the end credits. Not only is The Outer Worlds a great game in its own right, but it also throws down the gauntlet at Bethesda's feet by proving that just because these types of games are incredibly complex, that doesn't mean that so many bugs, glitches, and other technical issues are to be expected, accepted, or forgiven.
I smite you in the name of the law!
Number 6. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Confession time. I am not a massive fan of the Star Wars universe. I don't mind it, I've watched the original trilogy as well as a couple of the more recent films and I think they're okay. They just don't get me all that excited. So when it came to checking out Jedi Fallen Order, I was expecting an okay video game that would basically live or die based on how much it would pander to the fans of the franchise, but thankfully, I was wrong. Over the past couple of years, I've really started to develop a liking for games that follow the Souls-like design principles. Not so much the combat or the difficulty, but more in terms of the world structure and the checkpoint system and that tense atmosphere that these elements can create. So I was very surprised when I found out that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order manages to be a near perfect gateway into the Souls-like genre. I think that if this game had released prior to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, it'd probably receive a lot more praise than it already is, because in many ways they're both incredibly similar games. From a presentation standpoint, Respawn Entertainment have done a stellar job in recreating that feeling of Star Wars, and thanks to the Unreal Engine, many of the game's real-time cutscenes do look genuinely impressive. Now, while I'm not a massive fan of Star Wars, I have enjoyed many of the video game adaptations in the past, but it's been quite some time since we've seen a truly decent single-player experience set within the universe, so I'm hoping that this game signifies a shift in the terms of the handling of this iconic IP going forward.
Okay, shut that thing off and grab some seat.
Number 5. Metro Exodus. Metro Exodus is not only the most immersive game that I played in 2019, but quite possibly one of the most immersive games that I've played ever. This is not down to dumb luck either, but rather down to clever design. Where most single player games are more than happy to pull you out of the experience and dump you into menus when you want to look at your map, craft a few items, or modify your weapon, Metro Exodus instead opts to have you do all these things from within the game's world itself. It also helps that this is without a doubt one of the very best looking games on the market, with some of the most detailed environments that not only look great but also function to deliver some awesome tidbits of environmental storytelling. For me, environmental storytelling is one of the most important aspects of games that allow for exploration, so it's nice to see that the developers have done such a good job with it here. Unfortunately, due to a lot of the controversy orbiting around the Epic Game Store exclusivity deal, as well as most of the bigger content creators focusing so heavily on the ray tracing features rather than the game itself, I don't believe that Metro Exodus has really received much of the praise that it truly deserves. If you're somebody that missed out on Metro Exodus due to boycotting the Epic Game Store, or simply because it never hit your radar, I want to let you know that it is now available as part of Microsoft's Xbox Games Pass for PC and will be releasing over on Steam on the 15th of February. It's a great game that's part of a great series, and I for one really hope that more people get to check it out. Number 4. Devil May Cry 5. In recent years, the once super popular hack and slash genre has somewhat fallen by the wayside, with most development studios and publishers now favouring large non-linear open worlds over more linear experiences, especially here on the PC. So when Capcom announced the return of the mainline Devil May Cry series, a series that's not received a new release in over a decade, I was both very excited as well as a little concerned. Most of my concerns centered around the possibility of modern game design tropes sneaking their way in and altering too much of that core experience that the franchise is known for. But thankfully, that's not the case at all. Devil May Cry 5 is a complete package that channels its predecessor's focus on high-octane hack-and-slash action without taking itself too seriously. Running on Capcom's in-house RE engine, the engine that also powers Resident Evil 7 and the Resident Evil 2 remake, DMC5 showcases some of the finest looking real-time cinematics in the whole of gaming and a level of performance optimization that is genuinely impressive. Throughout the campaign, you'll get hands-on with Nero, Dante, and series newcomer V, each with their own unique movesets and playstyles, vastly expanding on the already diverse combat. A common complaint when it comes to these kind of linear action games is the lack of replayability and the amount of content on offer. However, the reality is that reaching the end credits in a game like this is only really half of the challenge, with the goal of reaching the coveted S rank of each chapter being the other. A task that's going to really require that you learn the ins and outs of each of the characters' fighting styles to achieve, especially at higher difficulties.
Hey, Psycho! What's the merchandise?
Hey, stop bitching and take cover.
Number 3. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. While I'm unable to confidently say that Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice is the best game in FromSoft's lineup, I have no problem whatsoever in saying that it's the one that I've personally enjoyed the most. When it comes to mechanical skills, Sekiro is by far the most demanding game that FromSoft have ever released. However, providing that you exceed a certain level of skill, it also becomes one of the easiest. There's the chance that if you come into Sekiro with the expectation of it just being Dark Souls set in Japan, that you're going to be very disappointed due to your expectations not being met. While the game is still incredibly difficult and much of the core is very similar to what we see in the Soulsborne series, there's enough changes here to make the actual experience feel very different. To the point where I kind of feel like the comparisons between Sekiro and the Soulsborne series is simply quite unfair. Instead of learning enemy attack patterns, rolling through damage and sneaking in the odd hit every now and again, you're going to be focusing much more on all-out aggression and deflecting blows. While this may only seem like a relatively small change, the ramifications are huge as it shifts the difficulty from being knowledge-based to being based on mechanical skill. The only downside that I can see with this approach is that it is possible that some players could end up being skill gated, as there are instances where you simply need to play better rather than falling back on aspects of the game that allow you to modulate the difficulty. While I can certainly appreciate that Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice is not going to appeal to everybody, I do believe that it's much more welcoming to new players than anything in the Soulsborne series, so if you're somebody that's been wanting to get into these types of games but have always been scared away by their many complexities, this is probably the game that you've been waiting for, though I would probably suggest that you check out Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order if you're looking for a smoother transition. Number 2. Resident Evil 2. It's safe to say that nostalgia is all too often the downfall of remakes, reboots and remasters, so with the original Resident Evil 2 being one of the most loved survival horror games ever released, the odds were firmly stacked against Capcom with this Resident Evil 2 remake, especially when you consider just how much they've gone in and changed. Thankfully, Capcom seem to have been able to continue their recent hot streak, and as a result, the remake can easily be considered a great success, and not only as a remake. Built on Capcom's in-house RE engine, the game manages to look awesome while maintaining surprisingly impressive performance considering the visuals on display. Gameplay-wise, it is actually amazing how much they've been able to change and rework while still keeping the core experience intact. The survival horror elements have been near perfectly tuned to the point where you're constantly feeling shrouded in a tense atmosphere without the developers needing to sync to cheap jump scares in order to get your heart pumping. While on the surface, Resident Evil 2 may seem a little on the short side, this is not a game that was designed to be put down once you've reached the end credits. Both Leon and Claire have big chunks of unique content sewn into their respective campaigns, basically begging you to play through the game multiple times. And even when you've completed those, you're going to gain access to a few short stories featuring extra characters and bonus weapons. Altogether, this additional content lengthens the potential playtime significantly. With the Resident Evil 3 remake just around the corner, there is no doubt that Capcom is going to be looking to emulate the success that they've had with Resident Evil 2, and based on their recent track record, I'd be a fool to bet against them.
You gotta be kidding me.
Number 1, and our game of the year, Control. As I mentioned earlier, this video has taken me much longer than it really should have, and Control is a big part of the reason for that. I actually finished this script for this video over 2 weeks ago and I'd started putting everything together. However, while recording some extra footage, I came to the realization that maybe, just maybe, I'd been a little bit unfair on Control, and as a result, I basically restructured this entire list. In fact, here is a quick little excerpt from the original script which I feel perfectly demonstrates why I believe Control deserves to be called Game of the Year. It reads, "A big part of me actually feels legitimately guilty for not putting this game at number 1, and to be completely honest, I'm struggling to put into words my justification for its positioning on this list. In truth, if I was magically granted the power to gift everybody watching this video a video game from 2019, that game would most definitely be Control." So yeah, I think one of the main reasons that I'd initially hesitated to put Control at number 1 was simply due to the lack of comparability with other games, mainly due to just how unique this game is. You see, while we obviously always attempt to rank games objectively, the reality is that doing so can be incredibly difficult without strong, well-defined reference points that we can compare from. For example, the Resident Evil 2 remake is pretty easy to judge, simply because we've got multiple reference points. We can compare it to the original Resident Evil 2, we can compare it to its own predecessors, we can compare it to other games in the genre, other zombie games, other Capcom games, and many, many more. Control, on the other hand, is so unique and different that most comparisons end up being the video game equivalent of comparing apples to oranges. Sure, it's a third-person shooter, but it's not like other third-person shooters, and yes, it's very linear, but not like other linear games. Even comparing this game to Max Payne, Alan Wake, and Quantum Break, Remedy's previous titles, really doesn't do this game justice. To be clear, I do believe that Control is the best game that Remedy has ever made, and if you've ever played any of their previous work, you should already know that what I just said deserves to be taken as a huge compliment. Remedy has always been a top tier developer, and Control is quite simply their magnum opus. Unfortunately though, in a situation almost identical to what happened with Metro Exodus, Control never really got the kind of positive coverage that it deserved at launch. Once again, we are looking at an Epic Games Store exclusivity deal, as well as many of the PC-centric media outlets and content creators focusing very heavily on the technology powering it rather than the game itself, which is a massive shame. Hopefully, with the game coming to Steam in the near future, Control could get a second lease of life here on the PC. If you've not got around to checking it out for yourself, I seriously recommend that you do when the next opportunity arises, because I can confidently say that there is nothing else quite like it out there, and I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed it.
You can't let this happen. You stopped it. You... Oh, thank you. That was... horror.
But anyway, that is going to be me done for today. Obviously, many great games release each year, and there is a very good chance that your own list is going to differ vastly from ours, so please don't be shy and let us know in the comment section down below what your favourite games of 2019 are. Also, if you are new around here, please do consider slapping that subscribe button and dinging that bell so you get notified of our future uploads. If you like this video, you can also like the video, and if you disliked it, there's a button for that too, and all we ask is that you please let us know why you disliked it so we can try and improve in future. Finally, we have also launched an official Sapphire Tech Twitter account that can be found at Sapphire Tech, as well as an official Instagram account that can be found at SapphireTech_official. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a second and go and leave us a follow. With that said, from myself and everybody here at the Sapphire Tech YouTube channel, thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one. So until next time, I'll catch you later. Bye bye.